Kiwis are jetting away overseas again, according to some of our largest travel agents.
Whether it's reconnecting families, cruise ship sailings or Disneyland trips, demand is up across the board.
And if social media feeds are anything to go by, plenty of people have swapped the depths of New Zealand winter for Greek beaches, European landmarks and Southeast Asian food adventures. Travel is back and bigger than ever.
There are twice the demand for international travel and domestic travel than there was before COVID.
We are just doing week after week, month after month of record sales, and that is just a reflection that people are wanting to travel.
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, how has the travel industry managed to bounce back after the dark years of the pandemic? And why are so many of us opting to jet overseas? Are we chasing the sun or just making up for lost time?
The demand for travel, which came back very strongly when borders opened, just hasn't seemed to have eased at all.
Grant Bradley is the aviation writer for the New Zealand Herald.
At the start, it was very much catching up with friends and relatives who you hadn't seen for 2 or 3 years. But as time has gone on, you've seen that big return of leisure travel and also corporate travel. There were fears during the pandemic that business travel might be over, but there's no evidence of that. The corporates are travelling in big numbers again.
Is it also I want to get somewhere away on holiday, I want to chase the sun?
Yes, certainly from a New Zealand winter this year, and New Zealand summer for that matter, but this revenge travel is a thing.
What do you mean by revenge travel?
They call it revenge tourism. Travel with a vengeance to get back at 2 years of pandemic.
People who were deprived of their annual trip overseas during the pandemic when borders were closed, taking revenge and getting out there in big numbers.
But if you've checked out airfares recently, you might have noticed they're a lot higher than they were before the pandemic. And there just aren't as many flights or airlines as there used to be.
Over the last 18 months or so, they've skyrocketed. They've gone through the roof. In the 12 months to March, in New Zealand, anyway, international fares were up around about 17%. In the latest quarter, there's some good news for consumers. They seem to have come back a little, so for that 3 months, down 12%. It's going to be interesting to see whether that's a long-term trend. What you're seeing with airlines is that they're making record or near-record profits. That's as a result of their yields being very strong, and that translates to people paying big airfares. And looking ahead with analyst forecasts, there's no sign of that easing.
Yeah, well, one example you do have is Air New Zealand.
That's right. It'll be a near $1 billion turnaround for Air New Zealand. So they're looking at a pre-tax profit of around about $580 million when they announce their result on August 24th. So that's a spectacular reversal of horrendous losses for a 2-year period. And that's a result of having fewer competitors in the market and being able to charge airfares which are a lot higher than what people were paying in 2019.
And why are they able to charge that much?
Well, the demand is there and the supply is short. Very, very simple economic equation.
So by the supply short, you mean there's just fewer flights available? Or?
Yeah, that's right. Well, Air New Zealand itself has got reduced capacity. They had to retire a number of their big long-haul planes. Their competitors, while they're coming back in numbers now, they haven't been able to spool up as quickly as they'd like to this market. They're concentrating on other, even more lucrative markets, but they're starting to come back in numbers, and you'll start to see a lot more competition across the Pacific to the United States, for example, over summer.
And more airlines are getting back on the runway?
That's right. Auckland Airport now has 23 airlines flying to 39 destinations. That's up 12 airlines and 21 destinations at the depths of the pandemic. It's still not the 30-plus carriers that they had in 2019, but they're getting there. And one important feature here will be the return of Chinese carriers. So China Eastern, China Southern, and Cathay Pacific coming back over summer. So That means that flights to China and beyond will reduce in price.
And yes, the figures certainly show more people are travelling.
Stats New Zealand figures show the number of New Zealanders who have travelled overseas in May, for example, doubled to more than 200,000.
That's compared to the same month last year.
That's still not near the numbers that they were travelling before the pandemic, but folks have a lot more confidence about going back there into the world.
And more people are keen to leave.
There's a research agency, Angus and Associates, in Wellington that's been tracking data for leisure travel intentions in New Zealand and Australia for the last 3 years or so. A lot more Kiwis are eyeing overseas trips now than they were earlier in the year. So around about 3 out of every 10 New Zealanders surveyed say they're intending to travel overseas for leisure, so have a holiday in the next 6 months. So yeah, that exodus of people going away, whether it's for a fly and flop holiday in Fiji or further afield, that trend's certainly running strong and will continue.
Are there any of these airlines putting on any new, exciting, say, routes around the world?
Look, there's an interesting new carrier coming in from Malaysia in August, Batik Air. Not well known in New Zealand, and that's going to be a really interesting study of a startup here. It's flying Kuala Lumpur to Perth and then on to Auckland using a narrow-body Boeing MAX aircraft, and that's going to introduce some competition into that Auckland-Perth route. This is something Air New Zealand will be frowning at because this airline will be operating a fairly near-new plane and offering a brand new product and hopefully lower prices.
It was a very, very difficult time. I've been in the industry 25 years and there's no doubt about it that going through COVID was our most difficult period ever.
This is Brent Thomas, Chief Operating Officer of House of Travel, New Zealand's largest independent travel agency. He's also the president of TANZ, the Travel Agents Association of New Zealand.
From our industry point of view, we went from around 5,000 people to around 2,000 people. So we had to lay off over 3,000 people. At House of Travel, we went from 1,200 staff to around 500 staff. And simply that's because as an income stream, overnight, we literally went from 100% of revenue to less than 10% of revenue. So, there was never an industry in New Zealand who got impacted more so than the travel sector, and particularly the outbound sector, because domestic travel still continued to some degree, which helped some of the inbound players be able to keep operating. But from an outbound point of view, it literally stopped overnight.
Did you have to shut shops or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, House of Travel, we went from about 80 stores to 60 stores. So not as many closures as you probably would think, but obviously within those stores, we actually, had to lay off staff, which is terribly hard because they're not staff, they're family. That's the way it feels like in our industry and in House of Travel in particular. And so having to lay off 700 staff was an incredibly difficult period.
How did you get through? Like, what was your business?
Our business was trying to support local operators, so we did as much domestic as we possibly could. There was still corporate travel happening in and around New Zealand. There were stores who were obviously repatriating people back from overseas when they could get them through the windows in MIQ, which was obviously incredibly difficult. And then we also had people who took on other roles. So, we were assisting in things like the Healthline, etc. But ultimately it was, to get the business through that period, it was a significant cash burn and it just required a lot of capital to keep the staff on. And if you look at the forecast that we did, we were wildly out because we were far too optimistic in terms of the return of the business. But we did get through and we were able to retain 500 key staff to get us through on the other side. We're now well over 800 staff and it's great to be back and effectively booming because the travel industry is back well and truly on its feet and New Zealanders are travelling overseas again in significant numbers.
Well, good. Well, tell me about that boom. I mean, how does it compare to pre-pandemic?
we're running about 80 to 90% of our customers' numbers, but our dollar value is greater than 2019, and that is simply because the fares are still slightly higher now than they were in 2019 for some routes. So as I say, some are coming down, but at this stage, the pricing generally is higher in 2023 than it was in 2019.
Okay, and where are the most popular destinations? Where do people want to go?
So Australia is always going to be our number one destination. 50% of all outbound travel from New Zealand goes to Australia. And then the next one, of course, is then the islands. And so between the two of them, they account for about 70% of the outbound travel. And that will always be the case.
Why is that?
Firstly, getting away from winter, it's an easy travel, 3 to 4 hours to those destinations. The pricing is good from that perspective, and it's just an ease of travel. So people are heading there in significant numbers, and we're seeing that come down with greater capacity now into the islands and into Australia. So someone like Qantas now has actually got greater capacity on the Tasman than they had in 2019, which is good. The issue we don't have is that the customer faces, we don't have enough carriers on the Tasman at this stage. We need more competition to get that pricing point, which is ultimately what drives even more demand. But outside of that, the other destinations or things are Europe is still very large, and people are travelling there in really good numbers for the 23 season. And the US, or North America actually, rather than just the US, is going to be very large in 23-24 because of these 8 carriers coming in with this increased capacity, with the likes of Delta, American, United Airlines, got Air Canada flying there, got Air Tīkiti Nui, Fiji Airways, and then of course Qantas near New Zealand fighting it out over the New York route.
Qantas wants its own slice of the Big Apple market, today starting a new direct flight on a major Air New Zealand route to New York. It marks the first time Qantas has flown from Auckland to an international destination outside Australia in more than 20 years.
So a lot of capacity going into North America. Fastest growing segment, though, in the market is cruise.
Hi, Mom. Kelly, Rita, and I just went on our Carnival cruise. Hey, look, that's me there in the middle. And we just really found ourselves, I got over my fear of bubbles. Rita took some time to reflect. We tried new things and new foods.
So people are buying more and more cruise than ever before. And what may surprise yourself and listeners is people are booking out to 2026 for their cruises now.
Wow,
if you're like me, you hardly know what you're doing in 2023, and some people are booking out 3 years in advance. But yeah, cruise is definitely is the fastest growing part of the market, and that's because there are so many cruise lines, and 2, they cater for so many different aspects. So whether it be couples or families or intergenerational travel, there's a cruise there for everybody, whether it be a river cruise in Europe or a sea cruise around the Mediterranean or into Alaska. There's just a myriad of choices.
So who is travelling? Is it more the business market? Is it families? People want to go on the OA? So
our fastest growing part of the market at House of Travel is actually the 25 to 40-year-olds. In fact, it's grown by 40%. So that's a significant increase in a segment of the market.
40% from when, sorry?
From 2019's numbers. So that's the last time we had what you'd call a normal year. So we base ourselves off the 2019 aspect, because you can't compare to 2022 because they were abnormal years for obvious reasons.
I'm at that age group myself.
Yeah, well, I think they recognise also that life is short, and you want to go and have all these experiences because you never know what's around the corner.
Oh, you're tempting me, Brett. You're tempting me.
Yeah, well, there's 220 odd countries in the world. There's a lot to see out there, and New Zealand's got a lot to offer, but so we are still quite an isolated country, and there's a lot of other things to go and see and do. So that's one aspect. I think we also see that more mature part of the market also recognise that they've only got so much travelling left in them. And so they were a little bit more hesitant to travel in 2022, coming out of COVID. but we've seen the increase in bookings for 2023 and particularly going into 2024. So our growth market is going to be the more mature market in the next 12 months as well. So the young ones have come in, they recognise the value that a travel agent brings. The more hesitant or the more conservative people are now booking for their travel because they don't want to miss out. If you're 60 years of age, for argument's sake, you might have 20 to 30 years of good travel left in you. So is that going to be 20 or 30 trips overseas? When you start to break it down like that and you've got a bucket list, you soon go through those years pretty quickly. So,
are people more chasing the sun? Is it a bit of seasonal affective disorder, or is it?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, if you look at it, you have a week of grey weather and everyone starts to feel a bit depressed, and there's nothing like going and to Fiji, Rarotonga or something and having a 28-degree day and sunny weather, it just makes you feel better. And that's what I say from a health perspective and mental health perspective as well. It's great to go and see the sun. So, yeah, I mean, from an outbound travel point of view, the high season is May through to September, early October when people do travel. However, having said that, what we have noticed since the borders opened in February 2022 is that seasonality has gone out the window at the moment. People are just wanting to get away, and so a place like Fiji, where it might have been slower over the rainy season, actually didn't slow down hardly at all this year. People just still wanted to get up to Fiji, and so they would go in the summer months. And I think that's going to continue for probably another 12 months, where people are still in a bit of catch-up mode for their travel, and they want to just go in and get their experiences, catch up with family and friends, and they'll just go whenever it suits them rather than worrying about going at a particular time of year.
So is it pent-up demand, or are you seeing brand new high levels of travelling?
The pent-up demand is well and truly behind us. We're now in just business as usual type mode, but having said that, the business as usual type mode is greater than 2019. So we are just doing week after week, month after month of record sales, and that is just a reflection that people are wanting to travel. And part of that, as I say, was because they now recognise, they've got whatever things on their agenda, on their calendar, and they just want to go and do it. So it's not so much pent-up demand. That was the story of 2022. This is now just normal demand, but it's at a greater level than we've experienced before.
One of the silver linings of the pandemic's abrupt halt to international travel was a massive drop in emissions. Grant Bradley says airlines are acutely aware of this issue.
The airline industry, while it's desperate to cut its environmental footprint, it gets it. It realises that that's where it's got to be going. The technology hasn't come to the rescue just yet. And so the best hope for long-haul flying is using sustainable aviation fuel, which is made from vegetable oil or sustainably grown crops that's refined around the world. But at the moment, it really is literally a drop in the ocean in terms of the supply and use on these aircraft. Something like 0.1% of flights being run on sustainable aviation fuel. And so the target of being carbon neutral by 2050 is quite an ambitious one for airlines. They're going to have to work very hard to collaborate with the suppliers of this fuel to produce it in sufficient quantities to power planes which are still reliant on fossil fuel. The other trend that you're seeing is a quite rapid development of alternative propulsion sources. So this is battery-powered planes and hydrogen technology. Problem with battery planes is that they will always be quite small because the power-to-weight ratio using batteries doesn't work in favour of something that has to fly. And hydrogen technology hasn't been developed quite yet. We're looking at next decade for something like that.
And Brent Thomas.
From an industry point of view, sustainability is a key focus for the next coming years. So there is a goal to be neutral in the airline industry by 2050. So they are aligning themselves to the accords that have been done around the world. And some of that is going to be around the efficiencies of the current planes. Secondly, there is a move in, electric planes will come. They will be for short haul, but they will come, and that'll make a difference. The blending of biofuels will make a significant impact as well. So airlines are really cognizant of the impact travel does have on the climate, and they are doing their bit to make sure that they address that issue over the coming years, and they're investing heavily to make that outcome over the next couple of decades.
So you don't feel like we're rushing back to, pre-COVID levels of high emissions right now?
Well, I think what we understand is that the airlines are tackling that issue. So we are travelling in significant numbers around the world, not just out of New Zealand. If you look right across the whole world outside of China, the passenger numbers are getting back to or over the 2019 levels. What airlines are doing to address that is, though, to make sure that they've got as efficient aircraft as they possibly can, and are certainly investing in research and development to make sure that they can continue to make them as efficient as they possibly can.
And the days of COVID restrictions, they're well and truly behind us.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few places that have, COVID issues in terms of requirements. And, New Zealand was one of the last countries to come out of the quarantine situation. So, the world had moved on, and, by the middle of 2021, we were probably 6 to 9 months behind a lot of the world in that regards. But, we are where we are today. And as I say, people are travelling in record numbers and getting out there and seeing the world again.
All right. Look, thank you, Brett. It's probably all we need there.
Okay, excellent. No problem at all. Go and do some bookings from overseas travel, because now's the time to do it.
Maybe I should. You tempted me there.
That's it for today. I'm Tom Kitchen. The Detail is supported by the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Today's episode was engineered by William Saunders. Our producers are Sarah Robson, Alexia Russell and Bonnie Harrison. Thanks to Grant Bradley and Brent Thomas. Mā te wā.